The silence didn't start all at once. That's the part people never understand. There was no announcement, no warning, no moment where someone said, "We're cutting you off now." It arrived the way fog does, thin at first, almost polite, until one day you realize you can't see the street anymore. It began after the letter. Not a threat, not a fine, just paper. Cream-colored, clean, professional. The kind of letter designed to calm you before it controls you. This notice is being sent as a courtesy reminder regarding a minor compliance concern observed during a routine community review. Courtesy reminder. Minor concern. Routine review. There was no accusation, no deadline, no penalty listed. Just a paragraph suggesting cooperation, followed by a closing line that felt oddly personal. "We appreciate your commitment to maintaining community standards." Community, standards, commitment. The HOA relies on our silence. Break the cycle by subscribing so no one fights this alone. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and hit that like button if you're ready for the truth. Now, back to the story words that sound neutral until you realize they are weapons. I fixed the issue the same day. I took photos. I emailed them back. Short, respectful, documented. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The next change was subtle. I didn't notice it at first because nothing happened. That was the trick. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just the slow withdrawal of something I hadn't realized I depended on. The woman across the street stopped waving. She had waved every morning for 3 years. Coffee mug in hand, robe tied loose, a small ritual between strangers who shared a block. One morning I waved. She looked through me. Not past me, through me. I told myself she was tired. Then the man next door canceled our usual trash day small talk. He rolled his bin out early, eyes down, phone suddenly fascinating. When I said his name, he flinched. Actually flinched. Like I'd startled him by speaking. That night I stood at my kitchen window and watched porch lights flick on and off down the street. The neighborhood still breathed, still lived, just not with me. That's when the second letter arrived. Still polite, still calm, still full of words that pretended to be helpful while quietly tightening the perimeter. This correspondence is to follow up on previous communication to ensure clarity and alignment. Alignment. Another harmless word. Until you realize alignment means obedience without resistance. They referenced a guideline I had never seen before, buried in an appendix. Revised 2 years ago, approved without a vote, enforced selectively. But the letter wasn't the point. The timing was, it arrived on a Thursday. By Saturday, the silence hardened. At the mailbox, conversations stopped mid-sentence when I approached. At the park, parents gathered their children a little closer. Not urgently, casually, as if responding to an unspoken signal. I hadn't been fined. I hadn't been sued. I hadn't been accused of anything illegal. Yet somehow I had been marked. That's when I understood the real power of an HOA isn't enforcement. It's narrative control. They didn't need to tell people what I'd done. They only needed to suggest that something was wrong. And once doubt enters a quiet neighborhood, it spreads faster than truth. The third letter didn't arrive in the mail. It arrived in conversation. I heard my name spoken softly at the end of a driveway, not maliciously, carefully, as if my name itself had become sensitive material. "Just be careful," someone said. "I don't know the details," another replied. "But the board doesn't usually get involved unless..." Unless what? No one ever finished that sentence. That's how isolation works. Not by cutting you off directly, but by letting everyone else imagine the worst so they distance themselves voluntarily. I checked the HOA portal obsessively. My account was clean, no violations listed, no balance due, no notices posted. Publicly, I was compliant. Privately, I was radioactive. The next inspection happened without notice. No knock, no doorbell, just a clipboard sighting and a photo taken from the sidewalk. When I asked about it later, I was told inspections were standard practice. Standard for whom? The emails grew slower, responses shorter, less friendly, still polite, but now precise, legal, measured. Please refrain from excessive communication on this matter. Future correspondence should be limited to compliance confirmation. This issue has been documented. Documented. That word carries weight. It implies permanence. A file, a history, a record that exists even if you can't see it. And that's when the neighborhood fully went quiet. Invitations stopped. The casual backyard gatherings that used to spill laughter over fences fell silent when I stepped outside. One afternoon, I walked past a group of neighbors clustered around a grill. The smoke drifted toward me. The conversation did not. It wasn't hostility. It was avoidance. That's the genius of it. Hostility invites confrontation. Avoidance suffocates you slowly. I started doubting myself, rereading the letters late at night, searching for the hidden crime I must have committed, wondering if there was a tone I'd missed, a rule I'd misunderstood, a line I'd crossed without realizing it. That's the psychological warfare piece no one warns you about. They don't accuse you loudly. They let you accuse yourself. By the time the official notice finally came, this one stamped, dated, formal, it almost felt like relief. At least now there was something concrete, something real. But even then, the language refused to name me as a problem. This matter has escalated due to ongoing community impact. Community impact. That was the charge, not a broken rule, not a violation. Impact, an invisible crime with visible consequences. I looked out my front window that night. The street was calm, lawns trimmed, lights warm, a picture-perfect neighborhood that no longer felt like mine. I realized then that the HOA hadn't just isolated me administratively. They had isolated me socially, psychologically, strategically, and they had done it without ever raising their voice. The silence wasn't an accident, it was the method. Silence changes shape after a while. At first it feels empty, then it starts pressing inward. I didn't notice when it stopped being quiet and started being heavy. But one morning I woke up already tired, like I'd been arguing all night without remembering the words. That's when the notices changed tone, not in content but in texture. They stopped explaining. No more courtesy language, no reassurance, just clipped sentences, each one engineered to sound final without actually deciding anything. This matter remains unresolved. The board is aware. Further review is ongoing. Ongoing is a dangerous word. It suggests motion without direction. A process you can't see, can't influence, and can't exit. I replied carefully. Always carefully. Short sentences, neutral language, no emotion. I attached photos, receipts, dates, proof. The responses came days later, sometimes a week, always brief, always non-committal. Noted, received, under consideration. Under consideration by whom? I never spoke to a person. Only a signature block, HOA compliance department. No names, no voices, no accountability. Just an entity that could observe, record, and decide, without ever being present. That's when the neighborhood pressure escalated from silence to choreography. I'd step outside and notice doors closing, not slammed, gently, like people didn't want to be rude about avoiding me. One afternoon, I overheard a neighbor explaining something in a hushed tone near the sidewalk. "I don't want to get involved," she said. "You know how the board is." That sentence landed harder than any letter, because now it was clear. This wasn't just about me complying, it was about everyone else staying safe. Fear had replaced friendliness, not fear of me, fear through me. I became the example. The HOA never told anyone to avoid me. They didn't have to. All it takes is one quiet conversation, one vague warning, one suggestion that someone is having issues with the board. Issues is another word that does a lot of damage without saying anything at all. Soon, even neutral interactions felt strained. When I asked a simple question at a community meeting, held via video, cameras mostly off, the response was immediate and chilling. "Let's stay on agenda," the moderator said. I was on agenda. I was the agenda, but not in writing, never in writing. After the meeting, my inbox filled with nothing. No follow-up, no clarification, just silence again, thicker this time. Intentional. That's when the inspections increased. More drive-bys, more photos, more notes that never quite became violations but never disappeared either. Observation logged. Item flagged for monitoring. Monitoring. That word makes you feel watched even when no one is there. I started changing my behavior unconsciously. Closing blinds, adjusting routines, walking differently, parking more carefully. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I didn't want to appear wrong. That's how control works best. When enforcement becomes internal. I caught myself hesitating before sending emails, rewriting sentences over and over so they wouldn't sound defensive, or angry, or confused. Confusion, I learned, was dangerous. Confusion could be interpreted as resistance. And resistance, even imagined resistance, is enough to justify escalation. The first real threat didn't come as a threat. It came as a reminder. This is a courtesy reminder that unresolved matters may result in further administrative action as outlined in governing documents. May result. Further action. Outlined elsewhere. I read the governing documents that night, all of them. Every clause, every appendix, every footnote. They were dense by design, circular, vague where it mattered most, full of words like reasonable, discretionary as determined by the board. There was no finish line, no clear path back to normal, only compliance, and even that didn't guarantee relief. That realization cracked something in me, because up until then I believed this would end if I did everything right, if I followed the rules closely enough, if I proved my goodwill. But the system wasn't designed for resolution. It was designed for leverage. The neighbors felt it too. I could see it in the way conversations froze when I walked past, in the way eyes flicked toward houses before people spoke, in the way someone once whispered, "I hope it works out," like I was sick. Isolation does something strange to time. Days stretch. Small moments feel enormous. Every sound, a car slowing, a phone vibrating, feels like a signal. One afternoon, a package was delivered to the wrong house. A simple mistake. When I went to retrieve it, the neighbor hesitated before handing it over. "I don't want any problems," he said quietly. Problems. I had become synonymous with that word. And still, no fine, no lawsuit, no official accusation, just pressure without bruises. The next notice arrived electronically this time. A PDF, clean, precise, cold. "Please be advised that continued non-resolution may necessitate referral to legal counsel for guidance." Referral, guidance. Words that sound harmless until you imagine the cost. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen, realizing something terrifyingly simple. I was being exhausted on purpose. Not attacked, not confronted. Worn down, every delay, every vague response. Every unanswered question added weight. The goal wasn't to punish me publicly. It was to make me small privately. That night, I heard laughter down the block. A gathering I hadn't been invited to. Music low. Familiar voices. The neighborhood was still alive, still connected. Just not to me. And that's when I understood the final layer of the tactic. If I fought loudly, I'd look unstable. If I stayed quiet, I'd disappear. Either way, the silence would win. By the time I closed my laptop, I knew something had shifted. The HOA wasn't just managing property values. They were managing people. And I was no longer just a homeowner. I was a problem being contained. The question wasn't whether this would escalate. It was how long they intended to let the pressure do the work for them. The day the certified letter arrived, the neighborhood was unusually calm. No lawn mowers. No kids on bikes. Even the birds seemed quieter, like the block itself was holding its breath. Certified mail changes your posture before you even open it. It tells your body something serious is about to happen, whether the paper inside deserves it or not. This one didn't shout. It never did. Please be advised that the association has sought legal guidance regarding ongoing compliance matters. Sought guidance, not filed action, not issued demand, just sought guidance. The phrase was deliberate. It placed the threat just far enough away to avoid responsibility, while close enough to feel inevitable. Attached was a timeline, not of violations, of communications. Every email I'd sent, every response they'd delayed, every inspection noted, dates without context, events without meaning, a history rewritten to look like escalation. I wasn't being accused of breaking rules, I was being accused of persistence. That's when I realized the silence had completed its job. The neighbors didn't need convincing anymore. They were already aligned. Not because they'd read the documents, but because they'd watched what happened to someone who didn't quietly disappear. I saw it the next morning. A neighbor who used to stop and chat walked straight past me, eyes forward, shoulders tense. He wasn't angry, he was afraid. Fear is contagious in communities like this. Not fear of punishment, but fear of attention. No one wants the board to notice them, and once the board notices you, everyone else learns to look away. I requested a formal hearing. It was my right, buried deep in the bylaws, but there. The confirmation came back 2 days later. Hearing scheduled, attendance at board discretion. Attendance. That word should have meant presence. It didn't. The hearing was virtual. Cameras off, names replaced by titles. Voices filtered through bad microphones. I spoke into a void. When I finished explaining calmly, factually, carefully, there was a pause. Then one voice said, "Thank you, the board will deliberate." Deliberate. I was removed from the call. No questions, no discussion, no indication anyone had been listening. The decision arrived a week later. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just restrictive. Additional monitoring, administrative review fees, continued documentation. A leash disguised as procedure. There was no endpoint, no appeal path outlined, no criteria for closure. I wasn't being punished. I was being managed indefinitely. That's the moment something broke, not loudly but cleanly. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped trying to be understood by a system that thrived on misunderstanding. Instead, I started documenting them. Every delayed response, every inconsistent enforcement, every vague phrase used to justify control. I requested records, inspection logs, communication policies, enforcement histories. For the first time, the silence wavered. Response times slowed further. Language tightened. Legal terms appeared more frequently. That's when the neighbors noticed something else change. Not in me, but in the board. Inspections that used to happen quietly became less frequent. Emails came from attorneys instead of anonymous departments. The tone shifted from vague to cautious. The silence, it turned out, had limits. Because silence only works when one side feels alone. I didn't confront the neighbors. I didn't plead. I didn't explain. I let them watch. They watched as the HOA stopped smiling. Watched as letters became more careful. Watched as language softened, not out of kindness but risk management. People began nodding again. Small at first. A wave returned. Then a greeting, not because they understood what happened, but because the threat had moved. That's the quiet truth no one talks about. HOAs don't need to be right. They just need to be unchallenged. And neighborhoods don't need villains. They need examples. For months, the silence had been weaponized against me, used to isolate, exhaust, and erase. But once I stopped absorbing it and started reflecting it back, the dynamic shifted. The final notice came without ceremony. This matter is considered administratively stable at this time. Administratively stable. Not resolved, not apologized for, just stable. The pressure eased, but the memory didn't. I walk the neighborhood now and hear conversations resume behind me. Laughter drifts again. Doors stay open longer. But something is permanently altered. I know how fast community can turn into compliance. how politeness can become control, how silence can be engineered. And I know this, the most effective harassment doesn't leave marks. It leaves absence. Absence of support, absence of clarity, absence of voice. By the time you realize what's happening, you're already alone, unless you choose not to be. The HOA never admitted wrongdoing. They never had to. They relied on the oldest tactic there is. Make one person quiet, and the rest will stay in line. But silence only wins when it's believed. And once you see it for what it is, it loses its power.